Much of Mexicans know what Mexico is now, but just a few know its history, its traditions, and the culture it hides under the skin. Mexico has lived through several wars, conflicts, revolutions, and aggressions, and even so, it keeps each part of it intact. Mexico has been part of a great transformation. Some of that snake is Mexico because even if it changes each layer of the skin often, it keeps the essential, the only and the most valuable thing, that is tradition. There is no doubt that Mexico is a rich country, but has it always been like this? The history of yesterday predicts the history of today. A period that marked part of history was a revolution. With its very jumping and aggressive name that means sudden changes, the revolution in Mexico caused many improvements, but in the process, it had several relapses. But in the end, the essence remained deeply rooted, the traditions in the Mexican Revolution.
In this relatively short documentary, we will explore each part of the skin of our snake, part of the transition of the revolution, and each part of the color of the blood of our traditions. Join us to know the history of yesterday.
Porfirio Díaz made great efforts to modernize Mexico by attracting foreign investors and adopting customs and fashions from abroad. Our government became a dictatorship. In addition, the railways, oil, and exploitation of coal mines were in the hands of foreigners, who forced the Mexican government to provide them from land use. Foreigners paid starvation wages to our workers, and the government allowed it. In short, Mexico was totally dependent on the foreign powers to survive. Over time, the dictator lost control of the government, and some of his ambitious collaborators took advantage of the situation to further exploit the proletariat and improve their own economy and social position without caring about the unfairness of the situation.
The armed conflict that took place between 1910 and 1917 began as a fight against the perpetuation in power of General Porfirio Díaz, but it resulted in a civil war between factions fighting for the authentic revolution. Different groups that had political and social rights as their banner united for that objective, but then they carried out a guerrilla war during one of the most troubled times for Mexico, which left more than 1 million people dead. In this armed struggle, heroes who lost their lives like Francisco Madero, Venustiano Carranza, Emiliano Zapata, and Francisco Villa participated. Revolution is defined as the radical and violent change in the political institutions of a society. However, the legacy of the armed movement is not limited to the political or warfare, because it has also left music, phrases, characters, food, and an endless number of traditions that prevail for more than 100 years from its beginning.
In revolutionary Mexico, society was divided into two, the upper class and the lower class. There was no line between. The society that belonged to the upper class was very limited, being less than 10% of the Mexican population. The activities that they used to have on weekends were in the mall or in the local squares. They enjoyed music and dances. Generally, they were oriented to the type of European culture. This type of families were considered as the perfect one. They used to listen to a lot of music from French and Italian composers, and they recognized artists like Strauss and Maurice Ravel. When the cinema arrived in Mexico in 1896, the first time, it was screened only in the Chapultepec Castle for Porfirio Díaz, his family, and guests. At the beginning, only mainly upper-class society went to the theaters.
Speaking of the lower class, families used to be very numerous with a standard of 7 persons per family. They were characterized by being too attached to the religion that was most commonly professed in Mexico. The paternal image that this type of families had was a very strong one, being the man who gave the orders and who had the vices with alcohol. On the weekends, the parents used to rest from the high effort that they made during the week. They used to drink excessively, reason why they did not spend quality time in family. Talking about music, this type of class was more inclined to Mexican culture. It was when los corridos originated. The most listened songs were La Delita, Yo Soy Mexicano, and Marieta. Families started going to the movies long after it arrived in Mexico, because it was very difficult for them to pay a ticket, and when they came, they were scared because they believed that the projected scenes were happening in real time.
Talking about food, the upper class consumed a lot of consommé, which was originated in France, and the lower class consumed a lot of what are chili, corn, and beans.
Porque Emiliano Zapata le gustaba el atole de ciruela, el elote, el pinoncillo, la canela, el mole de olla, las bolitas de masa, los frijoles de olla, también las tortillas hechas a mano y la salsa de tomate con jumiles. Si hablamos, por ejemplo, de Francisco Villa, le gustaba cargar carne seca, era algo que le gustaba muchísimo y bueno, él, a pesar de que se le pinta como un hombre alcohólico, se dice que él jamás bebía alcohol, que era algo que no le gustaba, inclusive se dice que él le gustaba ir al Paso, aquí a Estados Unidos, a tomarse una malteada de fresa, porque le gustaba mucho.
An example of the traditions, activities, and expressions that were originated during the Mexican Revolution and that we continue to use until this day are the war bands, commonly used in schools. Then a very common expression is carrancear, originated in the third stage of the revolution when the division was made between two groups, the conventionists and the constitutionalists. When Carranza arrives in Mexico, it is said that he went against the conventionists and that accompanied by his people stealing. Hence the expression that means to steal something. Another expression that its origins in the revolution is viene hecho la mocha. Mocha was said to be the new head of the trains that originated in that period. They were lighter and faster than the previous ones. So the meaning of that expression is that it's something he or she comes very fast. And the famous burritos also had their origins at this time. It is said that a man used to pass selling stews and tortillas on two donkeys, who are commonly called burros. Therefore, whenever they saw the man, they said the man of the burritos is coming, clearly referring to the animal. But over time, it was left to call this type of Mexican food burritos.